On this week's episode of Let's Talk About It, we're going to get started with our Faith in Context segment on church innovation. Going to do a little bit of exploring on the history of church innovation, the evolution of it, and what are some ways that it can look today that might be healthy. Then we're going to continue with our entertainment segment and explore recycled versus original cinematic content. You know all about it, the beloved reboots that have been coming out, plaguing our televisions for the last several years. We want to talk about whether we should be watching those and what we can get out of it. So, you're here. You made it. Now let's talk about it.
Well, hello there.
Yo.
It's another episode of Let's Talk About It. This is Malcolm Morgan.
This is Micah Morgan.
Did you like my intro?
You know, the tone of your voice was interesting. That was new.
It's dramatic. You gotta make the people,
Get the people going. Yep.
You know?
Figured that's where you were going with that.
So I'm not even going to say anything. I'm just going to give you the guitar riff.
Do you know what today is? Y'all, it is our 10th anniversary at the time of this recording. We're 10 years old.
Yeah, sorry. Wrong sound effect. That's what I wanted.
That's what you wanted.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just a regular day, right?
Regular
She
day?
said sarcastically.
10 days. 10 years. Jesus. 10, not 10 days, 10 years.
Well, that's kind of beautiful if it just feels like 10 days for you.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like
It doesn't.
a lifetime.
Somehow, I don't know how something can both feel as long as it is, but I feel like it's not also representative of our journey. I feel like our journey has been longer than 10 years.
Oh,
You know?
I agree.
Wow. By the time you guys be listening to this, the anniversary will have been over.
It's true. It's true.
Behind the curtain, this is how we do things, guys.
You might even have questions about why we're doing this on our anniversary. One answer is we really enjoy this.
Yes, we do enjoy this.
So,
and yeah, that's it. That's the only answer that we're going
that's
to
the
get.
only answer. Yeah. So, other than that,
Well,
how
happy
are you
anniversary.
doing? Happy anniversary. I'm also curious about how you're doing today.
I don't know. No, it's been a good day. You know, trying to get some stuff ready before we embark on our annual anniversary. Well, trip. It's our first anniversary trip
In a while. Man, COVID has really changed some things about our rhythms.
Yes.
But we're not going to be giving COVID all this screen time. All this.
It's true. That's good. We'll save
Not
that
screen
episode
time.
save that talk for another episode.
What is it? Stage time? Yeah.
Whatever. Mic time.
Mic time. Thank you.
Airtime.
Airtime.
There
Thank
it
you.
is. Yep.
Trying to find it.
There you go. We got it. We finally got it, guys. It took all this time.
So, man, we are not starting off light and fluffy today.
Step did it in this episode, that's for sure.
No, I hope it won't be too heavy. I mean, this is something I've been thinking about a lot. You know, just as we've all been going through the gestures broadly at the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And within the context of the church, how the pandemic has changed the way the church looks and the way the church operates. And so church innovation is something I think we're going to have to continue intentionally discussing anyway. But we're going to do a little bit of it here today. Yes. So I think one of the things that I've been curious about is, first off, when we think of innovation, what's kind of a working definition that we can have in our minds? So I'm curious, like when you think of the word innovation, how would you define it?
Oh, gosh. Webster's. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I think innovation, for me, innovation is very connected to growth.
Okay.
I think any industry, organization, institution, I think should be striving for growth, and that growth inevitably leads to innovation. Innovation is, I think, especially in the church context, we think of it as not changing the message, not changing the core beliefs, but maybe the method changes. You know, innovation a lot of times is tied to technology, but it's not always that. It's, you know, social media, for example, is an innovation, but it's still a part of the communication and marketing sphere.
True.
It's just an evolution of that.
It's a part of the method.
We've gone from largely a print world to a completely digital world now. Same general thing that we're doing, communicating information and getting information, but we have completely innovated how we get it, how we have access to it, and where it's available.
I'm curious, though, when you think of the direction between growth and innovation, am I hearing you say growth comes first and then the innovation?
That's a good question.
In your mind? Yeah.
I think they're tied together, but they don't always coincide, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I guess some innovation comes from something new coming into the equation, I guess.
Right.
A new company, a new technology. It's not necessarily tied to something else. But I think for the most part, you could tie innovation to growth.
Yeah. That's so interesting to hear you say that. My working definition of innovation actually doesn't have anything to do with growth immediately. So now I'm sitting here kind of chewing on what you said. But in the meantime, the way I do think about it is in terms of creativity. I think innovation is the commitment to the exploration of the evolution of ideas and methodology. But for me, that's fundamentally creative. And I also think innovation is just a natural part of being human.
Okay.
Now, of course, there have been scientists who have observed what they would call creativity in the animal kingdom. There are mammals who, thinking of chimps and things, they're able to draw, and I'm thinking of hunchback whales that do the really pretty songs, and scientists have noticed that the songs sound different based on like who the whale is calling or how they feel. So I think creativity doesn't only show up within humanity, but I think when it comes to God creating us in their image, that is one very special element that God trusted us with and expects for us to cultivate. So that's kind of what comes to mind for me.
I think the other thing that I just thought about was, I think a lot of innovation starts with a disruption of some kind. And so the two examples I thought of were the music industry. We had the development of like Napster and LimeWire, where people were getting music for free. And then we saw everything kind of begin the shift to iTunes and Spotify and streaming digital music. So it started with that disruption, and then we've got this innovation of music moving way more digital than analog than it was before.
Yeah.
Same thing we could look at like Blockbuster and Netflix. Blockbuster obviously cornered the market on video, and then Netflix comes in with streaming, and now everything has shifted in that direction.
Right.
So I think disruption, and to tie it into what we're talking about now, COVID has really done that for the church.
Yeah.
It has forced an innovation, I think, in an area further into a direction that maybe a lot of church has started going, but a lot of churches were forced into going once COVID kind of hit and shut down the world.
Interesting. Okay, now you really have my wheels turning, because if we're thinking about disruption as a familiar catalyst to innovation, now that has me okay, this is a caveat. Y'all know, maybe, that history is not my thing. So I'm really just thinking out loud right here. But hearing you talk about disruption as the catalyst for innovation has me curious about what got the church growth movement going. Like, what disruption motivated that? Because when I think of the history of church innovation, I think of the North American, like, U.S. church growth movement in like the 80s as one of the most major church innovation movements, or at least attempts of the church to do innovation in a systematic way. But I don't know. Can you think of anything just like within like our timeline, history wise, in Western culture that might have been a disruption, or was that just like happenstance that movement took off the way it did?
I don't know. I think we saw it may be, and I'm coming off my hip with this, but it may be connected to kind of the rise of the televangelist, like branded ministers and branded churches that started to pop up. And churches previously were very local. It was very, you go to the church that's in your area, in your neighborhood even.
And that's just all you had.
And that's it. Like you weren't really exposed to too much else unless you went and your church fellowship with another church, or you had family and you went to their church. It really wasn't. And families pretty much
stuck to the same
church that their mama went to, the daddy went to, all that stuff. And so I think television and those type of ministries, being able to see Billy Graham on television, later on T.D. Jakes and Joel Osteen and those people expanded people's horizons, and I think showed people that church can be marketed, can be polished, can be clean.
Yeah.
And people started to strive for that.
Yeah. And then that has me wondering, like, which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of situation. I'm still learning about the history of the church growth movement. But from what I know, Donald McGavran was kind of considered the father of the white evangelical modern church growth movement. And I mean, he really created this systematized way of thinking about missiology or expanding the church that, I mean, when you think about whether it worked, technically worked. For him, it was the tangible fruit of seeing droves of people attracted to a newly established church or church plant. That was evidence that it was working. But when I hear you think out loud about kind of the televangelism, I'm thinking about Billy Graham. I am curious if that was a motivator to kind of say, okay, going and attracting disciples is a really key way for the church to find new creative solutions to growth. But then, of course, to expand the conversation, I also find myself curious about how the church has defined growth over time. And I'm imagining, of course, I was not born yet in the 80s. But as I'm reading about kind of the church growth movement, growth was thought of in terms of numbers for a lot of folks with that church growth movement mentality kind of operating. But now, like, I find myself thinking about, with the pandemic looming over us in a lot of significant ways still, even after 3 years, how are we defining growth now? And I don't know, I've just been reflecting on that a lot lately. For you being in ministry, what are some ways that you think about growth?
I think the pandemic helped kind of crystallize that growth is about way more than numbers, less about those metrics, but it's about community and connection. I mean, during the pandemic, when you're meeting every week, you have a built-in way to see, okay, people are engaged, people are coming, people are worshiping, whatever. But when you're not able to meet physically, okay, so how you have to look at engagement differently. You have to look at how people are staying connected differently.
Yeah.
And so I think looking at that, for us, it was small groups. It was, prayer and other ancillary things that we were doing. How are people caring for each other? For our church community, we saw people developing their own kind of pods where they could fellowship together, have their kids play together. and things like that. So I think those are kind of those are the things that you kind of start to look at, but it's still hard because, I mean, it's not like we're going to each place and saying, okay, how's this going over here? It's all right. Like kind of word of mouth and social media and who you happen to know and have talked to. It's tough.
Which makes me wonder if a key part of kind of the evolution of church innovation also involves redefining the way we measure growth and success. Because again, like if we're kind of tracking the evolution in the 80s, the evidence of growth would have been a bunch of new people popping up at your church. But now here in the present, we've had to redefine what the signs of growth are and kind of reimagine them as folks, like you said, connecting on a regular basis, really being interested and curious about each other's internal worlds, meeting each other's needs, engaging in care, all of that. So that really introduces for me an additional layer of what church innovation is, that it's, of course, you know, a part of growth, it's creativity, but that it's also kind of redefining the way that we measure success. Yeah. So then that kind of brings us to the present and kind of thinking about if the church is doing innovation, right? That's kind of the implied, what am I thinking of? Part of the argument. Why does the church need to innovate if it does at all? What do you think?
I mean, the easy answer is the world around us is changing.
Right.
People are changing.
It's either going to innovate for us or
you go get innovated right out of the conversation.
Right.
And I think that's the tough thing about church innovation is that the church overall is pretty slow to change because we don't want to feel like we're reflecting the culture or reflecting the culture, I guess is the best way to put it.
Man. And I almost got in my soapbox about that.
And so, so as we look to like, the times are changing, you'll see a lot of people start to resist that and be like, so what is that? God is the same. It's like, yeah, God is the same, but our methods, our strategies should evolve as the times evolve. That doesn't change our message. It doesn't change our purpose. It doesn't change the things that are important to us, but it does change how we do ministry.
It really does. And I mean, I think there's so much wisdom in being willing to say that, yes, God stays the same today, yesterday, and forevermore. And also how the world responds to the gospel is changing. And I can't help but to think about, there's a scripture in 2 Timothy, I want to say like chapter 4 toward the beginning, where it talks about or encourages us rather to preach the word and be prepared to like make sure you're able to do it in a way that's patient with careful instruction. But then there's also a part in there that talks about how people will not always just kind of receive sound doctrine. And so it's important for us not to just assume that because we do things the same way that we're just going to get these miraculous fruit-bearing results. And so I think there's some humility in being willing to say, like, the world is changing and it takes creativity to present the gospel in a way that's going to be received readily and really take root and bear fruit.
Yeah, and I think we have an example of Jesus to look to for this. When he told stories, when he told parables, he told stories that the people could relate to, digest, and understand in a language that they understood at the time. You see him use a lot of farming metaphors, a lot of agricultural language, because that's what the people were doing every day. And so if you could connect with them where they are, they're way more likely to understand your message and to embrace it and bring it into their lives.
Exactly. So that's one reason why the church needs to innovate. Or I guess that's technically two reasons, right? Like the world is changing, but then also the reason we innovate is because as the world changes, we want to make sure we're presenting the gospel in a way that can be received. But I think a third reason why the church innovates or should innovate is, again, I think it's an extension of God's creativity. Like to be able to show the world that we are also excited by being creative and finding creative solutions to serve others. I think that in and of itself is a beautiful ministry to the world. Because if you think about it, going back to your point about kind of being counter to the culture, capitalism basically says if you find a way to do things that keeps productivity flowing, just keep doing that. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I think what can be beautiful about the church is that we can find beautiful, caring, nurturing ways to do things that are new, but again, don't change the gospel message, that still serve people. And so I think that's another reason why the church should innovate. Absolutely.
I mean, I've gone on a journey of discovering how creativity fits in the kingdom of God. And so I think that's really important that we do highlight that God is the ultimate creative.
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite things about God, and I know like all of us have attributes of God that we naturally lean into. Like for a lot of people, it's God's power, it's God's justice. For a lot of people, it's God's love. But for me, one of my favorite things about God is God's creativity. Because there's just so many ways that we can expect God to bless us. And I feel so inspired by and just blessed by seeing God do things in a really creative way, that we didn't see coming. Like for me, that just is such a beautiful part of God.
Absolutely.
So I think the invitation is keep on innovating.
Keep on innovating and I think one of the bad things about the pandemic, I think, is it sped up churches a little bit more than they would have liked to.
Oh, sped up like aged?
I'm talking about it put them doing things that maybe they weren't ready for.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
And so, especially when it comes to like live streaming, really embracing social media as a form of communication. I mean, you think about it, churches really we rely a lot on communicating with people in service, announcements and word of mouth, all of those things. And so churches having to really embrace, if you don't have, an email list or you don't have everyone's information, social media can be a touch point for a lot of people. But, I think overall, especially smaller churches have been a lot slower to embrace social media because it's like, oh, we don't need it.
Yeah. And the ways that we have discovered what we really did need. I mean, the pandemic just really has not been gracious to, a lot of folks. So, yeah. And I mean, I can't help but also at least try to sober myself and remember that we all churches are trying to embody the Great Commission, right? To make disciples. And so even when I reflect on the modern church growth movement, there's quite a bit of it that I lament kind of looking back on it because that was, of course, the birthing ground of the homogeneous unit principle, which was this kind of obsession with creating a space that encourages folks to look the same. And what that ended up becoming was a white evangelical church that was very, very homogenous, right? And so that's something that I lament. I also lament that, there was kind of a hyperfixation on numbers and whatnot. But even alongside of that, there was this commitment to how do we get folks connected with God? How do we get folks following Jesus? And so like we said earlier, as long as that message stays at the root, that commitment stays at the root, then innovation can really be a beautiful thing, that evolution of innovation in the church.
In innovation, before we leave this conversation, I want to make sure that people understand innovation doesn't have to change your identity. I think what's important is to find the innovations, a place for growth, a place for creativity that is authentic to you in your church body. I think we all were pushed to do live streaming, but I've been doing a lot of reading and research on my own as a person involved in ministry that maybe live streaming isn't for every church, especially now that we're coming back to in-person worship and that's becoming more common. It's important that we don't try to take other churches' strategies and just blanketly apply it to us. Look at your church. Look at ways that you can grow, ways that you could spread the gospel, reach your people and reach other people, but do it in a way that's authentic, that's real for you, that's attainable for you.
That's the part.
And for your volunteers and for your staff. That's really the most important thing, is that we are trying to evolve with the times, but also staying within our means and doing what works for us.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Speaking of innovation, one place that is slow to innovate in some ways is the entertainment industry. I think especially during the pandemic, when we were all locked at home watching our TVs, we saw a lot of reunion specials. We saw fundraisers of, for example, The Office, doing a table read of one of their episodes live to raise money and things like that. But we're seeing a lot of recycled content or rebooted content.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to talk about recycled and rebooted content versus original content.
Yeah. Why don't we start with some of the bigger ones that came out recently?
So looking at some rebooted things, I think
Right.
during the pandemic, some of the big things that we saw was the Fresh Prince reunion.
Yeah, that's the first one I thought
That was a big one. And then, of course, the reboot of the Fresh Prince called Bel-Air that came on Peacock. That's kind of a unique situation where somebody kind of threw out an idea, put together a whole trailer of what a dramatic retelling of the original comedic Fresh Prince was.
I still remember when that came out.
And the timeline was on fire.
Yeah.
Everybody was like, "Oh, we would love to see it.
When can we get this?"
And then Will Smith saw it, connected with the guy who did it, and throughout were able to work out a process, start writing, getting the cast together, and created the show that actually put together a pretty good modern retelling of a classic show that we all know and love.
Yes.
So I think during the pandemic, that was a couple. Any examples that come to your mind?
Yeah, I mean, there's that one, Jurassic Park that just came out. I'm also, what's the one with, was it Brad Pitt? With the airplanes?
Oh, you're talking about with Tom Cruise?
Tom Cruise.
Maverick.
Yeah,
they did the Top Gun sequel.
I don't know why I get those gentlemen mixed up. My bad. And then, of course, Game of Thrones is now back on our TV screens as, was it House of the Dragon? Yep. So those are also ones that come to mind. But I'm also thinking of like TV shows. What's the one? Goodness, I should have looked this up before we started. But That's So Raven is now back on our screens.
Is it Raven's House?
I think it's
like
Raven's
that?
House.
A few years ago, they did the Boy Meets World.
Oh, that's right.
Sequel show where they followed like the kids. It was Girl Meets World or something like that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, for me, Raven's House, I was excited about that one because I loved That's So Raven when I was growing up. But a lot of people were like, nobody asked for this. So, I mean, it's been interesting. And I do, kind of going back to where you started just a few minutes ago, it did feel like the pandemic was a catalyst for a lot of that. It almost felt like a lot of, producers and screenwriters were sitting there like twiddling their thumbs like, all right, so what are we going to do with all this extra time on our hands? And the reboot felt like a very convenient outlet for that creativity.
And it's safe. It's intellectual property that has a built-in audience.
Yep.
That is going to reach that audience. Is going to be excited to re-engage with that story. So it's kind of a low-risk proposition. At a minimum, you have this built-in audience, and then maybe you're introducing this to a whole new generation of listeners and watchers. But especially during a pandemic when everybody's trying to figure out how can we get eyes on our product? How can we get eyes on our streaming service? What's a tried and true way to do that? Pull up something old that we know works. Let's polish off some things, bring back the actors that you love.
Nostalgia
is a heck of a drug.
Yeah. And I mean, for the most part, I did see a lot of positive responses. But then, like, I'm also thinking about, like, some of the animated movies, for example. Mulan, when Mulan 2 came out, and Eddie Murphy wasn't in it.
Oh, you mean the live action Mulan they did? Are you talking about the? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. But just like the response of like, who asked for this? Everyone knows the original is the best one. You know, that reaction I think was almost unanimous from what I saw. But then I remember you and I were also talking about Lion King, not the the live action one I was also a little confused about because, again, no one asked for that. But, you know, Beyonce did her thing and whatnot, so makes sense. But what were the movies that we were talking about where I said I hadn't seen?
It was The Lion King too.
Was it 1.5 or something? 1.5?
Well, yeah, they did a 1.5 thing a few years ago. It's been a while now.
Right.
But it really wasn't a different movie. It was just like some additional scenes.
Oh, okay.
And stuff like that. But then there was The Lion King 2 that is an actual sequel to The Lion King.
And that's the one where the For Shame song is in. Okay.
Deception.
I had to get my bearings right. But yeah, I had completely overlooked that one because, like,
and I had seen it before.
No one asked for that.
And where I was a kid, like, oh, Lion King 2's coming out. Oh, I need to see it. You know, and as a kid, it was cool.
Yeah.
Didn't go back to it. But. So,
I mean, so then that brings me to just being curious about like the kind of folks that enjoy reboots. Like, I know for me, my personality is kind of like, I'm really content with, if something's good, then it's good. Like, I don't need it to be redone. I don't need nothing added to it. So I find myself being really content with the original and a little irritated by reboot. But I don't know, like, what do you think would be like some ingredients to someone's personality? Is it more than nostalgia that would motivate someone to be like, yeah, I really love reboots?
Well, I think we have to separate reboots from like sequels. Because sequels, I think, are the continuation of a story, right?
Oh yeah, I'm blurring them together.
So a lot of stories you want to see, okay, what happens next?
Right.
Like, what happens next? I want to see like more of these characters and all of these things. Whereas reboots, where you're taking something and doing it again, it is an opportunity to do make some different choices. I think I enjoyed the live action Disney movies because they're a little different. They gave me something a little different. Like I think I'll use the example of Aladdin. Like, people looked at Aladdin and they were like, how are we going to do the genie without Robin Williams? Robin Williams is the genie. How can we even touch this in any way? I feel like, for me, Will Smith did a good job of not trying to do a Robin Williams impression. But make it his own. Added his own flair to things. Made it more, you know, we had kind of the dancing and the rapping more so than the singing.
Right.
That we saw in the original.
Right.
So it's cool to see people kind of take these roles that we have completely, you know, put in a box of certain people.
Yeah.
But then also see kind of new life be breathed into it. And then it reimagines it for another generation where, you know, the next generation of kids may not necessarily love Aladdin and Lion King and Goofy movie like we did because we were kids when we saw it.
Right, right.
But if they see this new one, they're like, oh, I love Aladdin. Same story, same basic premise.
Yeah.
But now the genie to them is Will Smith and not Robin Williams.
Okay. I'm sitting here. I felt myself tense up a little bit when you started talking about Will Smith as the genie because, again, I was sitting there like, you can't redo Robin Williams. Like, that is the genie. He will always be the genie. Like, y'all, I absolutely love Aladdin. But I will give you that. I think you're right. I think Will Smith really did a good job of making that his own. So yeah, I do appreciate that clarification between like the sequel and the reboot. But then that also makes me curious, if we go back to Bel-Air, I think there were some really cool ways that, even though that was technically a reboot, right?
Yes.
Kind of. I think there were some cool ways that they maybe expanded the story or like filled in the story for us in a way that almost felt like a sequel, maybe like the story was being continued.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's I think so. With the Bel Air example, I think a lot of what they did was try to pay homage to the original series in a lot of ways. Little, you saw the old Aunt Viv in the show, but we get to see kind of these characters in a much more complex way.
That's it. Okay, yeah.
They're way more. I don't want to make this sound like I'm talking badly about the old show, because The Fresh Prince of Bel Air is my favorite sitcom,
and I think it was really well done.
I can watch it any day, all day. If there's a marathon on, I don't even care that I've seen it 100 times. I can watch it, and I love it for what it is. But this gives me something much different, because the character relationships are complicated. The characters themselves aren't as flat. There's a lot of dimensions to it, and it's set in a modern world.
Yeah.
And so I love what they've done with Hillary in the new show. There's so much depth to her.
Yep.
Still gives you kind of some of that surface stuff, but they've given this entrepreneurial spirit and this creativity that wasn't necessarily in the sitcom. But it's still semi-true to some of the archetype of that character.
Exactly.
But I think it just brings a different depth to the story, the way they built her.
And that's what I was getting ready to say, because even in the original, Hillary was an entrepreneur. It was just that her intelligence was so flattened as a character that she was only able to do but so much.
Yeah.
So by setting Bel Air as a drama, I think that really gave the screenwriters just a lot more room to fill her out. Because as a comedy, you had to flatten her out.
Yeah.
But that's really cool. Carlton.
Oh yeah.
Whew, man.
Yeah. We took a character. You look at Carlton you don't like him, but it's like you still love him.
You really man.
But in this show, they are trying to make you really not like Carlton. To your core.
I feel like you still do,
you start to feel bad. This started to become a Bel Air podcast. Maybe we need to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to do that. But you start to feel sorry for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
More than you like. It's hard to,
it's a genuine concern.
Yeah. It's concern, but you're also God, you God. And that's kind of the beauty of it. You don't have one way to look at any characters in the show. Everybody is kind of I don't know.
Right.
Which I love in television, where you flip the whole idea of who do I like in the show. It's one of the reasons I like the Social Succession, which is the example of original content.
Exactly.
It is an example of a show that's not based on any other show that's out. It's completely built in its own world, and we're getting introduced to new characters in a new place. But in Succession, it's hard to really side with anybody, because you start to see everybody's warts.
Yeah, there's no real villains, no real heroes. Well, I think maybe they're all villains and no real heroes. But yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess we'll see if this develops into an episode of its own. Yeah, but I think what I sense us saying is the beauty of a reboot really can be that you can kind of explore, expand on some things that the original audience was probably craving in the first place.
Or didn't know they were craving.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even with all this talk about reboot, there's still room in the marketplace for original content, and there's still great original content being made. And I think, to me, one of the shining examples of that is Jordan Peele and what he's doing with his movies. Original screenplays that he is developing on his own. He does pay homage to other, especially in the horror genre, different things. You hear him talk about it all the time in his interviews. But in terms of storytelling, original characters, original settings, I think Jordan Peele is at the top of the list of some of the original content that we've seen. Is there anything else that kind of sticks out to you when it comes to original content?
Oh my goodness.
The show we just reviewed, Severance, is one.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say Severance on Apple TV Plus. But then also I'm thinking of Nolan's Inception.
One of my favorites.
Right, understandably so. Because just the dream within a dream concept for me. I can't think of any other movie that really plays with that, at least not right here in this moment. But that felt very original to me. Very original. Don't Look Up.
Yeah.
On Netflix. Y'all, if you haven't streamed that yet, go look it up, because you talk about a movie that really plays with just some of like the darkest sides of society right now in a very playful way, though. I think that's what was really cool about the movie, because it was turning a mirror to society that was pretty bleak to look at, but the comedy was solid.
Yeah.
So I think Don't Look Up was a solid piece of original content too.
Yeah. Another movie that is, I want to say it was a couple years ago, A Promising Young Woman, the girl that kind of goes through and gets revenge on these serial abusers. And
which streaming platform was that on?
It was I don't know if it was a movie that came out, so I'm not sure if it was a streaming platform per se.
Okay. I mean, y'all know we don't watch regular TV, so.
Yeah, I don't know when other than Game of Thrones, I have no idea when anything actually comes
Exactly. On. Yeah, that A Promising Woman was, that was a good movie. What genre would we put that in? Is that thriller, suspense?
The thriller.
Yeah. Really good storytelling.
Yeah, so I think one of the great things about original content is the ability to tell diverse and unique stories. You can really be way more creative with the things when you're not beholden to a previous text or a previous casting or whatever. You can really just flesh out a story in a universe, in a world, in a way that I think is hard to do sometimes if you're constantly rebooting.
Exactly, because in a reboot, you're constrained by the nostalgia of your audience. Because if you stray from that too much, then they're not going to enjoy it.
As the people from Star Wars,
yikes,
they went one direction, and then with the latest trilogy, they're like, "Oh no, hey guys, we saw the original. See, watch, we're just gonna duplicate it right here."
Yeah.
And then, that opens the lane for different storytellers. Women, people of color, LGBTQ community as well. It opens up a lane for people to tell different kind of stories in different ways as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the verdict? To reboot or not to reboot?
There's value in both.
Yeah.
I think we see a lot of reboots now. And we'll probably still continue to see that because it's a proven formula. But there's still a lane for original content. There's still, your original content can still cut through because of the uniqueness of it, because it's able to tell different stories. And I love a little bit of both. Love a little nostalgia, but it's nothing like being surprised by a story.
Yeah, that's a good feeling. Real good feeling. So what did we talk about today?
Well, we talked about church innovation, ways that the church has been forced to it. We talked a little bit about the church growth movement and how that may have contributed to innovation. We even talked a little bit about changing our definition of growth and how that is connected to how and when we innovate. And then we ended today talking about original versus recycled content. What are some of the positives of recycled content? Why is this such a hot thing right now? But then we also discussed the lane that exists for original content and the unique stories that could be told and the different ways to flesh out worlds and universes in original content as well.
We did talk about that.
But the conversation is not over. We would love to hear what you think. What are some of your favorite reboots? What are some of your favorite original stories? And how do you see the church innovating? All of it. Let us know. You can use the hashtag talk about it POD. Give us your questions, your comments. Tell us what you thought of this episode. And you can also reach out to us directly. Micah, how can they reach you?
You can reach me on Twitter at jmariemorgan. And how can they reach you?
They can reach me on Instagram and Twitter at MalcolmDOT And also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us, lets us know that you guys are engaged and loving the show. Some of the feedback we've gotten from you guys has just been great. It encourages us so much, and we love that you guys are enjoying the content. Yeah. We just turn on these mics and start talking.
Pretty much.
So it's great to see that people are seeing some value in that.
Well, I think we did a thing.
We did a thing. Thank you guys for joining us, For this episode of Let's Talk About It, I'm Malcolm Morgan.
And I'm Micah Morgan.
And we'll see you all next time.